One quarter, you stop being indispensable and start being expensive. Nothing about your work changed. Your performance reviews didn't change. The budget changed. And suddenly, every quality that made you valuable got rewritten as a risk. Experienced became costly. Knowledgeable became rigid. Reliable became not agile enough. Senior became overqualified. Loyal became not a culture fit. Same person, same work, different story. And the strange part is, you did exactly what the system told you to do. You spent years becoming the person they said they needed. You learned the systems. You absorbed the politics. You survived 3 reorgs, 2 mergers, and a decade of management fads. You trained new hires who didn't know where the shared drive was. You built knowledge that can't be downloaded from a tutorial, and none of it protected you. Because the system changed the scoring criteria and forgot to mention it. Nobody in a modern office is going to look you in the face and say you are too old. That would be illegal. That would be traceable. That would leave a paper trail. So instead, they invented a vocabulary: fresh energy, dynamic team, digital native, growth mindset, someone who can grow with the company, a more hands-on profile. None of those phrases mention age. Every single one of them points directly at it, and the person hearing them knows exactly what they mean, but has no language to fight back, because the discrimination has been pre-laundered through HR-approved wording. You cannot file a complaint against a vibe. Here is the part they will never say out loud in the all-hands meeting. An experienced worker costs more, but that is the least of it. They have boundaries. They know when a deadline is fake. They can tell when a reorg is really a purge. They will not treat unpaid overtime as a personality trait. They understand what is legal and what is just tolerated because nobody has pushed back yet. That is not a culture problem. That is a control problem. A younger worker has not yet learned any of that. They will stay until 9 on the Tuesday because nobody told them they could leave. They will watch a manager take credit for their work and call it mentorship. They think dysfunction is hustle. They mistake their own insecurity for drive. And they will defend the chaos because they have no baseline for what a functional workplace even looks like. That is exactly why they get hired. Not because they are better, because they are easier to use without resistance. Before you open your mouth in the interview, the story is already written. Slower, rigid, technophobic, out of touch, just riding it out until retirement. A 26-year-old who has never heard of the platform gets called a quick learner. A 52-year-old in the same position gets called a dinosaur. A young employee who questions a process is innovative. An experienced employee who questions the same process is resistant to change. Same behavior, opposite narrative. And nobody in the room thinks they are being biased because the bias has been baked into the language so deeply it just feels like instinct. The assumptions do not need evidence. They just need a room that has already decided what experience looks like and what youth looks like, and sorts people accordingly before the conversation starts. Modern offices have built an entire performance culture around the aesthetics of youth. Not output, aesthetics. Slack replies at midnight. Enthusiasm about every new tool that does exactly what the old tool did with a different skin. Constant rebranding of basic ideas into frameworks nobody will remember in 18 months. An unspoken agreement to treat instability as innovation. This is not productivity. This is a costume. And the experienced worker ruins the costume, not because they refuse to participate, but because they remember. They remember when the same strategy was tried under a different name and buried after it failed. They remember the project leadership pretends never happened. Memory is a threat in an organization that runs on collective amnesia. And enthusiasm is easier to manage than competence, which is why so many offices promote the performance of energy over the evidence of results. Nobody talks about what this does to a person across months and years. A 33-year-old manager gets assigned to lead someone who has been in the industry since before that manager graduated college. And something shifts. It is not hostility, it is something quieter. The slow, creeping awareness that the person sitting across from you in the one-on-one has seen through every leadership framework you learned at that offsite in Austin. They do not need your coaching. They probably do not need your approval. And every time they offer context you do not have, your authority feels a little more decorative. So the manager rewrites the discomfort as a performance issue, not collaborative, resistant to feedback, negative energy, low enthusiasm. And then it goes further, because insecure managers do not just reinterpret behavior, they manufacture documentation. They start building a paper trail that does not reflect what happened but justifies what they have already decided to do. Every neutral interaction gets framed. Every honest question gets logged as pushback. And by the time anyone reviews the file, the story is already sealed. The employee never stood a chance against a narrative that was being written before they walked into the room. Experienced employees know things that make fragile leadership nervous. They know which processes exist only for optics. They know which managers got promoted for politics, not performance. They know which KPIs are being gained. They know which strategy already failed 2 years ago before the new VP repackaged it with a fresh slide deck and a company-wide email. A worker with memory is harder to gaslight. A worker with context sees through the narrative. And in a system where half of leadership's job is perception management, that is not inconvenient. It is dangerous. So they do not fire you for knowing too much. They freeze you out. You get left off the email chain. You stop being invited to the meeting. Your input gets acknowledged and then ignored. And slowly, without a single written warning, you realize you are being managed out of relevance by people who cannot afford to have you in the room when decisions get made. Not a termination, an erasure. When the budget tightens, the math is simple and the cruelty is efficient. 1 senior salary funds 2 juniors. That equation gets presented in a slide by someone who has never met you, does not know what you built, and will not be in the room when they tell you. Your name is not a person in that meeting. It is a line item with a number next to it, and the number is too high. 20 years of institutional knowledge gets weighed against a quarterly projection, and the projection wins every time. Department realignment, role redundancy, strategic consolidation. It never sounds personal. It always is. And the ones who survive the layoff get something slower. The performance review that drops a half grade after 7 years of exceeding expectations. The new manager who documents every interaction. The lateral move everyone understands is a demotion in a different font. The quiet suffocation until you resign and they call it voluntary. Even after all of that, try getting back in. Overqualified. Too senior. Not aligned with where the team is going. Overqualified means you are more capable than the role requires, and instead of being an advantage, that terrifies them. Because someone overqualified might outgrow the box, might question the manager, might expose the distance between the job description and the dysfunction behind it. They do not want someone who can do more. They want someone who will accept less and not notice. The humiliation of training someone who later becomes your boss. The sick vertigo of hearing your idea ignored in a meeting, then applauded 3 weeks later when a younger colleague restates it with slightly different adjectives. The shame of being called negative when you were being accurate. The quiet destruction of watching your caution get relabeled as fear and someone else's ignorance gets celebrated as boldness. And then the job search. The interviews where you feel the room cool the moment they calculate your graduation year. The rejection emails that say nothing. The silence that says everything. It is not a career setback. It is an identity demolition. Because you spent decades building a self around professional competence and the system dismantled it in a fiscal quarter and called it strategic. And the loneliest part is that no one around you will confirm what you already know is happening because the system is built so that naming it out loud makes you sound bitter instead of accurate. This was never about younger workers versus older workers. That framing is a distraction designed to keep both sides looking at each other instead of looking up. Young workers are not the enemy. They are next. Give them 15 years. The same system will find a reason to call them expensive, inflexible, and out of touch. Because the machine does not care about age. It cares about leverage. Companies say they want experience. What they actually want is usefulness without resistance, knowledge without opinion, seniority without cost. A career's worth of pattern recognition that never once makes leadership uncomfortable. They told you experience was job security, but experience was never what they valued. Obedience was, and the longer you worked, the harder you became to keep obedient. That is not a flaw in your career. That is proof the system was never built to reward what it promised. So what do you actually do with all of this? Protect your money before they protect their budget. If you are earning a senior salary, assume that salary has a target on it. Build a larger emergency fund than you think you need. Stop inflating your lifestyle every time your income rises. Financial flexibility is not pessimism. It is the only leverage that does not require anyone's permission. Stop assuming your work speaks for itself. It does not. Document your wins where leadership can see them. When you adapt to a new tool, make it visible. When your experience prevents a costly mistake, do not let that save happen quietly. If your contributions are invisible, your value is whatever story someone else decides to tell. Do not become the museum of how things used to work. Stay fluent in emerging tools and trends, not because the old way was wrong, but because fluency in the new language is what keeps you from being framed as obsolete. Make it structurally difficult for anyone to narrate you as someone who only looks backward. Control your narrative before someone else writes it. When you offer historical context, frame it as foresight, not criticism. When you push back, present it as risk awareness, not resistance. The difference between strategic and negative is often just packaging. In a system that rewards optics, packaging is survival. And prepare your exit before you need one. Keep your resume current when things feel stable. Maintain relationships outside your company. Monitor the market while you still have choices, not after the restructuring email lands. Loyalty is a beautiful idea. It is not a strategy when the system does not return it. None of this is cynicism. It is pattern recognition. The system does not punish the people who see it clearly. It punishes the ones who see it too late.